In your binder, this is on page 32. It's called Blair's Green-Eyed Cody. I don't know what Cody has to do with it. The green eyes I can figure out. If you had some Mardi-Gras beads, that's where these green eyes came from. And some people say they're easy to come by. I have trouble coming by them this size. There was some kind of an event here in Reardon, a couple of years ago, and some gal had a station. She had all these strands of Mardi Gras beads all over her table. I said, "Where did you find those?" And I've been looking all over for them. I said, "Well, here, take them." So I've gotten at least 2 or 3 years supply. You just take the chain and cut 2 of them out and use that for the eyes. In your pattern book, it calls for chenille. I meant to call John Blair. He's a past member that moved down to Texas that does a lot of creative stuff with flies, from kind of like Fishy Fulham, comes up with common ordinary household items and turns them into flies. But if you use chenille, this little pattern will not float. That chenille will get wet and it will sink. If it's one of those days when they don't want something floating, they want something that's going to kind of say semi-submerged, that may work real well. But I like this as a brim fly, and it works pretty well. If you substitute for the chenille, you substitute some closed cell foam. And I got 2 or 3 colors up here. The pattern doesn't really make that much difference. You can use different colors of foam for the body. If you had different colors of eyes, I have some of these that are in a real bright blue for another pattern that John developed. There's nothing real magic about what colors you select. On the foam, I used whatever I had available. Some of this is like 3mm foam as compared to stuff like this, which is 2mm foam, and you can tell the difference in the thickness. If you want a little bit fuller body, the 3mm will give you a little bit fuller body. It's also a little bit more difficult to wrap, and we'll talk about that when we get to that point in the lure. So, and John's pattern does not call for a tail. I like some flash in the tail, and I've added that. That's another personal preference. You can use it or not use it, whatever turns you on. So let's tie a couple of these. I'll tie one, and then I'll go back and tie another one for those of you that just going to watch this first time. I'm going to lay a little bit of a thread base up front. It seems that those eyes attach better if you have a little thread base there. And I'm just going to lay that eye on. You can tell these have, I don't know if you can see them or not, these are plastic, they're hollow, and there is a seam along the side. I try to keep the seam on the side so the eyeball itself is round. It's easier to do that if you put it on that way. I'm just going to lay that on and make some wraps around. Once you've got 3 or 4 wraps around, I'm just going to use crisscross wraps for the time being. If you want these to stay a little bit firmer, you can put a drop of super glue in the middle. But once I've got them in, then I do some figure 8s. Just vary the wrapping technique. And then I may go back to just some crisscrosses. And then before I finish, I try to go all the way around the base. Get 3 or 4 wraps that way. And if you got them, you can tell it's on there pretty firm, but they are still movable. So if you want them immovable, you just put a little bit of super glue on there, and that holds them in place. I didn't bring any, so I'm not going to use it today. Then I'm going to take my thread all the way back to the bend. And I'll make a little flash tail on this. What I do, I take, maybe 3 pieces of this crystal flash, pearl, and I'm going to just, those shorter pieces like that, if you bend that right in the middle, you can usually get 2 flies out of one of those strands. But I take the bend like so, I'm going to lay that over in the loose wrap until I got it connected good. And then I'm going to tie that in right at the peak of the bend. And then I'm going to trim that, not quite the length of the hook shank. And you can see I've got enough left here that for my second fly, I can use that second little wad of the crystal flash. And I got some that's kind of twist on me. All right. On the foam, I'm going to use the orange because it shows up real well. And I'm going to back this up a little bit. You can see my eyes are not really stationary yet. What I like to do is I just cut the corner of that off, kind of make an elongated cut like that, and then I tie that point on, connect it good, and then I'm going to bring my thread back up to just behind the eyes, and just leave it there, let it hang. If you take your foam, you kind of have to use a little finger pressure. If you pull this foam really tight, it's going to absorb water quicker. So I'm going to try and just make some loose wraps. I don't want that real tight. And if I want it a little bit fuller, because this is a 2mm stuff, I'm going to try and kind of overlap each wrap a little bit. And as I get further forward, that body enlarges a little bit. I'm going to get it up here behind the eyes and take my thread and just kind of bring it over and drop it a couple times. Then I can pull that tight. And then I'm going to trim this off. Be careful you pull that tight enough in there that you aren't going to trim your thread. Okay? And I don't know if you can see this. That wasn't a really super cut. Yeah, I've got this little hump right here. I'm going to carefully try to get some of that out without getting my thread. And now I can wrap over that. Make sure I've got that foam connected there so it's not going to come undone. Okay. Now, the legs on this thing, or I guess the legs or overwing or whatever, I have got these in 5. These are 5 strips per, 4 or 5 strips per. And the only tricky part about this is you've got to fold these. You see, I've just folded it over at the middle, and I've got those folded wraps right here. So the trick is to leave a little bit of a V as you tie it in, and the tricky part is laying that flat on top of your fly and getting a thread wrap over it, keeping it sort of in place. Now, if you've got 2 or 3 wraps on it, you can manipulate this a little bit without pulling it out. I've kind of got a little kink in that one. I don't know if I can get that one out or not. I may not mess with it. But I'm going to make sure that's attached well. And then I'm going to finish that off. do as I say, not as I do. Man, this is so hard for me to do because that's not the way I tie at home. I'm so far from my work, I can't see what I'm doing. Okay. Okay, I've got that pretty well tied off. My eyes are, I should glue my eyes, and I didn't bring any super glue.
Here's the nail polish.
It's too late.
Okay.
Yeah, I just make a mess if I try to solve it now. Plus, you got to wait a little bit if you glue it to get the glue to dry. So I definitely have my V there. Then if you take your dauber, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to separate each one of those. And by tying them in, you constrict it enough that they spread pretty well. And there is, without glue, a green-eyed Cody. Now, if this foam, some of this foam absorbs water much easier than others, this yellow stuff is a very closed cell foam. This orange stuff, I don't know if you can see it, it's much more porous, and it will soak up water much quicker than this. I put some dry fly goop on the foam to make sure it stays floatable. If you have a problem with it absorbing water and wanting to sink on you, you might want to try that.
Can you use nail?
Pardon me?
Can you put nail polish?
It'll add a lot of extra weight. And if you don't like the fact that this white part of that is showing and you want to make it match your thread, good old permanent black magic marker covers a multitude of sins, mistakes, afterthoughts, whatever, but that is a green-eyed Cody.